June 6, 1944. The scale of Operation Overlord is often measured in soldiers, but the true marvel lay in the thousands of strange, flat-bottomed vessels that delivered them to the beaches. Without these specialized machines, the Allies would have been halted at the water's edge. From the iconic Higgins boat that stormed Omaha Beach to the massive landing ship tank known for delivering entire armored divisions, these vessels changed the nature of amphibious warfare forever. Let's explore these steel machines that unlocked Fortress Europe, starting with the small assault craft that led the very first wave. The most recognizable face of the invasion is undoubtedly the LCVP, or Landing Craft, Vehicle, Personnel, famously known as the Higgins Boat. Designed to rush the initial waves of infantry directly onto the sand, this craft was built largely of plywood to save steel, featuring a crucial steel ramp at the bow for rapid deployment. Capable of carrying 36 combat-equipped troops or a small vehicle like a jeep, it was the workhorse of the U.S. sectors. However, its wooden hull offered zero protection against German machine gun fire, making the final approach a terrifying gamble for the men inside. Yet General Eisenhower himself later stated the war could not have been won without it. Serving a similar role but with a distinct British design was the LCA, or Landing Craft, Assault. Unlike its American counterpart, the LCA was built with light armor plating and a lower silhouette, specifically designed to protect British and Canadian commando units during the approach. It could carry roughly 35 men and was slightly slower, topping out at roughly 7 knots, but it was far quieter and sturdier in rough seas. While it offered better protection than the Higgins boat, its lower freeboard meant it was prone to swamping in the choppy waters of the English Channel on D-Day. Before the ramped boats became standard, the Allies relied on the LCPL, or Landing Craft, Personnel, Large. This was the early British version of the Higgins design, characterized by a pointed bow without a drop ramp. It was fast and seaworthy, capable of carrying up to 36 men, but it had a fatal design flaw for an assault craft. Troops had to jump over the side to disembark. This exposed soldiers to enemy fire in deep water, leading to its relegation to second-wave duties or command roles by the time of the Normandy invasion. Recognizing the danger of jumping over the side, the design was modified into the LCPR, or Landing Craft Personnel, ramped. This transitional vessel took the existing hull of the personnel carrier, but retrofitted it with a narrow wooden ramp at the bow, bridging the gap between early prototypes and the final LCVP. It retained the speed of its predecessor, but still suffered from a narrow exit point that could create fatal bottlenecks during a hot landing. By D-Day, these were largely being phased out in favor of the wider ramped boats, but many still served in logistical support roles. To protect these unarmed troop carriers, the invasion force utilized the LCSS, or Landing Craft, Support Small. Built on the same hull as the standard Higgins boat, this variant traded passenger space for firepower, mounting twin 50 caliber machine guns and sometimes rocket launchers. Its primary role was to run alongside the first wave, suppressing enemy beach bunkers until the infantry could hit the sand. While it packed a punch, it was just as unarmored as the troop transports, meaning crews often had to expose themselves to heavy fire to keep the landing zones clear. While infantry seized the beachhead, they needed heavy armor to hold it, and that job fell to the LCMO-3, or Landing Craft Mechanized. This ubiquitous steel vessel was the smallest craft capable of delivering a single 30-ton Sherman tank, or 60 soldiers, directly onto the beach. Distinguished by its square open well deck and a powerful twin diesel engine setup, it could back off the beach under its own power after unloading. Its limitation was capacity. Carrying only one tank at a time meant thousands of trips were needed, but its reliability made it the backbone of the ship-to-shore armor shuttle. Recognizing the need for slightly more deck space, the U.S. Navy introduced the LCM-6. This was essentially a stretched version of the LCM-3, with an additional 6-foot section added amidships to accommodate longer vehicles or more cargo. While visually almost identical to its predecessor, this extra length became crucial for hauling the longer, specialized engineering vehicles and trucks needed to clear beach obstacles. Despite the extra capacity, it shared the same engines, making it slightly slower and more sluggish to maneuver in the heavy surf of June 6th. On a much larger scale, the British Royal Navy deployed the massive LCT Mk4, or Landing Craft, tank. Designed specifically for the shallow gradients of European beaches, this vessel was over 180 feet long and could carry up to 6 medium tanks, or nearly 400 tons of cargo. It featured a unique, incredibly shallow draft that allowed it to get high up onto the sand, but this made it structurally weak and prone to buckling in rough Atlantic waves. Despite the risk of breaking apart in storms, it was the primary heavy hauler for the British and Canadian sectors, delivering the critical mass of armor needed to break out of the beaches. The American equivalent operating in the Western Task Force was the LCT, MK-5. Unlike the British version, this craft featured a modular design that allowed it to be broken into 3 sections and transported on the decks of larger ships across the Atlantic. It carried roughly 4 medium tanks or 150 tons of cargo and famously included a stern anchor to help winch itself off the beach after unloading. However, it lacked a rear ramp for drive-through capability, meaning vehicles had to reverse out or turn around if the front ramp was damaged, creating potential logistical jams. One of the most terrifying variants of these tank carriers was the LCTR, or Landing Craft Tank Rocket. Instead of tanks, the deck of this vessel was covered in racks holding over 1,000 explosive rockets, designed to saturate the German defenses just minutes before the troops landed. With the ability to fire its entire salvo in roughly 2 minutes, it created a massive area of effect bombardment. The downside was that once the rockets were fired, the craft was essentially a large, defenseless barge that had to withdraw immediately to reload, limiting its use to the very opening moments of the invasion. Moving from open boats to ocean-going ships, we find the LCIL, or Landing Craft, Infantry Large. Distinctive for its narrow hull and 2 side ramps that lowered effectively like gangways, this ship bridged the gap between a transport ship and a landing craft, capable of sailing across the channel under its own power with 200 troops below deck. It allowed for a more organized deployment of reserves, but the narrow side ramps proved to be precarious targets for enemy snipers, and the troops were often dropped in deeper water than the smaller Higgins boats, leading to equipment loss. Overshadowing everything else on the water was the LST, or Landing Ship Tank. Affectionately nicknamed the Large Slow Target by its crews, this massive 328-foot vessel was the technological marvel of the invasion, capable of opening huge bow doors to disgorge heavy tanks, trucks, and trains directly onto the shore. It could carry nearly 20 Sherman tanks on its tank deck and lighter vehicles on its top deck, effectively serving as a floating garage. Its deep draft meant it often had to wait for the tide to recede to unload dry, making it vulnerable to artillery while grounded. But it was the only vessel capable of sustaining the invasion force long-term. A vital yet often overlooked adaptation of this giant was the LST, H, or Landing Ship, Tank, Hospital. These were standard LSTs converted with surgical suites and stretcher racks to handle the massive casualties expected on D-Day. They could sail right up to the beach to pick up wounded soldiers, bypassing the dangerous transfer to hospital ships further out at sea. While they saved countless lives, they were still painted largely in gray camouflage rather than white, as they operated in active combat zones, meaning they enjoyed no special immunity from enemy fire. Coordinating this chaotic traffic required the LCC, or Landing Craft Control. Roughly the size of a standard personnel boat, but crammed with state-of-the-art radar, radio equipment, and navigation charts, these vessels acted as floating traffic police. Their role was to find the exact beach sectors and guide the waves of assault craft through the smoke and confusion. They carried no troops and minimal weaponry, yet if an LCC was lost, entire waves of infantry risked drifting off course into heavily defended kill zones where they were not expected. Sitting further back was the LCH, or Landing Craft Headquarters. Usually a converted large infantry craft, this vessel served as the floating command post for assault group commanders, bristling with antennas to coordinate naval gunfire and air support. It allowed commanders to see the battle with their own eyes rather than relying on reports from England. However, being a command hub made them high-priority targets for German coastal batteries, and their destruction could sever the link between the troops on the sand and the battleships providing cover fire. Not all landing craft stopped at the water's edge. The DUKW, widely known as the Duck, was a revolutionary 6-wheeled amphibious truck. It could ferry 2.5 tons of supplies or 25 men from transport ships miles out at sea, drive through the surf, and continue directly inland to supply dumps without ever stopping to unload. This seamless logistical link was critical for keeping the rapid advance moving. Its main weakness was its thin skin and tires, which were easily shredded by shrapnel or beach obstacles, often leaving them disabled in the surf zone. Blurring the line between vehicle and vessel was the Sherman DD, or duplex drive tank. These standard Sherman tanks were fitted with a canvas flotation screen and propellers, theoretically allowing them to swim ashore from miles out to support the infantry immediately. The element of surprise they provided was immense, as Germans did not expect armor in the first wave. Tragically, at Omaha Beach, rough seas swamped nearly all of them, sinking 27 tanks and their crews, proving that the technology was too fragile for the harsh reality of the channel weather. To handle the immense volume of cargo from the LSTs that couldn't beach themselves, the Allies deployed the Rhino ferry. These were essentially massive motorized rafts built from pontoon cubes, powered by giant outboard motors, designed to ferry trucks and tanks from ships anchored in deep water to the shallow beach. They were slow, cumbersome, and difficult to steer in currents, often drifting off target. But they provided a crucial bridge for heavy equipment in the early hours before formal harbors could be established. Supporting the logistical grind was the LBV, or landing barge, vehicle. Often converted from British Thames lighters or other commercial barges, these unglamorous vessels were towed or powered across the channel to dump bulk supplies like ammunition and fuel. They lacked the tactical speed of the assault craft and were sitting ducks for air attacks. But their flat, wide decks were essential for moving the awkward, heavy crates that didn't fit neatly into the specialized landing ships. Finally, we have the highly specialized LCA-HR, or hedgerow. This was a conversion of the standard British assault craft, fitted with rows of spigot mortars specifically designed to blast paths through minefields and beach obstacles. Instead of troops, it carried explosives intended to detonate mines sympathetically before the men landed. While an ingenious concept, their short range meant they had to approach dangerously close to the enemy defenses, and many were destroyed before they could fire their clearing charges. From the plywood Higgins boats that disintegrated under fire to the massive steel LSTs that built the bridge to Europe, this armada was a triumph of engineering born of necessity. Without this diverse fleet, the liberation of Europe would have remained an impossible dream.